Have you ever wondered about the intertwined history of Russia and Ukraine? Two nations that share deep-rooted historical connections yet stand at odds today. Let's rewind the clock back to the 9th century, where our story begins in the expansive lands of Eastern Europe. At this time, a federation of Slavic tribes, known as the Kievan Rus, rose to prominence. This federation is considered the cultural forebear of both modern-day Russia and Ukraine, serving as a cradle for shared traditions, language and religion. Fast forward to the 13th century, a cataclysmic event shook the Kievan Rus, the Mongol invasion. This invasion fragmented the once unified Kievan Rus into several smaller principalities, each battling for survival in a rapidly changing world. Meanwhile, in the midst of this chaos, the city of Moscow began to rise in power and influence. Over the centuries, it would grow from a minor town to the heart of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, eventually becoming the capital of the Tsardom of Russia. In the 17th century, a significant chapter unfolded in our tale. The Tsardom of Russia, seeking to expand its territories, incorporated a large part of Ukraine. This union had profound cultural and political impacts, shaping the destinies of both nations in ways they could not have foreseen. The incorporation brought a fusion of traditions and a shared identity, yet it also sowed the seeds of discord. The tension between the desire for autonomy and the reality of political integration would echo through the centuries, shaping the relationship between Russia and Ukraine. This tension, a blend of shared history and diverging paths, would come to define the complex relationship between these two nations. Thus, the seeds of a complex relationship were sown, blending coexistence with conflict. As we delve deeper into this intricate tapestry of history in the coming scenes, we'll see how these early dynamics continue to reverberate in the present day, influencing the current geopolitical landscape. Fast forward to the 20th century, a time when both nations are part of the larger Soviet Union. What happens then? The Soviet Union, a behemoth of a political entity, comes into existence in the early 20th century. Comprising a multitude of different ethnicities and cultures, this federation is marked by a strong centralized power. Within this amalgamation of cultures and nations, Ukraine finds itself playing a significant role. Ukraine, with its rich agricultural lands and industrial potential, is seen as a vital cog in the Soviet machinery. The Soviet policies, however, are often harsh and detrimental. The most devastating among these is the Holodomor, a man-made famine in the early 1930s. Engineered as a result of Stalin's forced collectivization policy, it results in the death of millions of Ukrainians, a tragedy that still resonates in the collective memory of the nation. Further, the Soviet era is marked by Russification efforts, a policy aimed at diluting local cultures and languages. Under this policy, the Russian language is promoted over Ukrainian, leading to a significant erosion of the Ukrainian identity. A major event that punctuates Ukraine's Soviet history is the Chernobyl disaster in 1986. The nuclear accident, one of the worst in history, leads to significant loss of life and long-term environmental damage. This incident not only exposes the shortcomings of the Soviet system, but also spurs a national awakening in Ukraine, leading to increased calls for autonomy. The late 1980s and early 90s witness a wave of change sweeping across the Soviet Union. The federation is on the verge of collapse, and the grip of Moscow over its satellite states is loosening. Ukraine, like many other republics, finds itself at a crossroads. It has the opportunity to break away from the Soviet Union and chart its own course. As the Soviet Union crumbled, Ukraine found itself standing on the precipice of independence. The stage is set for a new chapter in Ukraine's history, one filled with promise but also fraught with challenges. The year 1991 marked a turning point as Ukraine declared independence, but what followed? With newfound freedom, Ukraine faced a host of challenges. The path towards sovereignty was far from smooth, and the fledgling nation had to grapple with economic struggles, endemic corruption, and political instability. The economy, heavily intertwined with that of Russia, took a significant hit. The transition from a command economy to a market-based one was fraught with difficulties. Industries struggled to adapt to the new economic environment, unemployment soared, and the standard of living plummeted for many Ukrainians. The country's GDP, once robust during the Soviet era, experienced a steep decline, painting a grim picture of the economic hardship Ukraine had to endure. Corruption also reared its ugly head, permeating all levels of society. It was not uncommon to see politicians and public servants enriching themselves at the expense of the population. This endemic corruption weakened the public's trust in the government and stymied the nation's progress. Political instability was another significant challenge. The country's political landscape was marred by infighting, power struggles, and frequent changes in leadership. The Orange Revolution of 2004 was a clear manifestation of this instability. The revolution, sparked by allegations of rigged presidential elections, led to widespread protests and civil resistance. It resulted in a rerun of the elections, which were won by the opposition leader, marking a significant shift in Ukraine's political direction. The Orange Revolution, however, was a double-edged sword. While it ushered in a new era of political freedom and democratic values, it also deepened the divide between the pro-European West and the pro-Russian East, setting the stage for future conflicts. These challenges, however, were just the beginning, as a larger conflict loomed on the horizon. The trials of independence were far from over, and Ukraine was about to face an even more formidable adversary. This was the dawn of a new era, one that would test the resilience and resolve of the Ukrainian people like never before. By 2014, tensions between Russia and Ukraine escalated to a full-blown crisis. But what led to this escalation? Let's dig a little deeper. The year 2014 marked a significant turning point in the history of these two nations. Ukraine, seeking closer ties with the European Union, found itself at odds with Russia's vision of maintaining a sphere of influence in the region. The Ukrainian government's decision to pivot westward sparked the Euromaidan protests, which led to the ousting of Ukraine's then president, Viktor Yanukovych. However, the aftermath of these protests ignited a chain of events that would forever change the geopolitical landscape. Russia, viewing the power shift in Ukraine as a threat to its strategic interests, made a move that stunned the world: the annexation of Crimea. This move was seen by many as a blatant violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and international law. Meanwhile, in eastern Ukraine, a separate conflict was brewing. Pro-Russian separatists, emboldened by Russia's actions in Crimea, declared independence in the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. This sparked a war that has, to this day, claimed thousands of lives and displaced countless more. The international community was quick to respond. Sanctions were imposed on Russia by a multitude of countries, led by the United States and European Union. These measures aimed to pressure Russia into reversing its course in Ukraine. But despite the economic toll of these sanctions, Russia has shown little sign of backing down. The annexation of Crimea and the war in eastern Ukraine have had far-reaching implications. The geopolitical fault lines have been redrawn, and the relationship between Russia and Ukraine has been irrevocably damaged. The people of these regions continue to bear the brunt of these conflicts, their lives marked by uncertainty and hardship. The conflict remains unresolved, casting a long shadow over the relationship between Russia and Ukraine. Today, the crisis continues, but what can leaders like Putin and Zelensky do to find a resolution? The present situation is a precarious dance between two nations, each with their own historical narratives, geopolitical objectives, and societal pressures. Russia views areas of Ukraine as intrinsically linked to its own national identity, citing historical ties that go back centuries. On the other hand, Ukraine, independent since the fall of the Soviet Union, is determined to protect its sovereignty and its future as a nation. Amidst this complex backdrop, leaders like Putin and Zelensky are tasked with finding a solution that respects both national interests and international law. This is no small feat. However, there are some possible paths they could take. One potential solution is through diplomatic negotiations. These could involve a range of stakeholders, including not just Russia and Ukraine, but also other international actors like the United Nations and the European Union. The goal would be to find a mutually agreeable settlement that respects Ukraine's sovereignty while addressing Russia's security concerns. Another approach could be to explore the possibility of a federal solution. This would involve granting certain regions of Ukraine a degree of autonomy, allowing them to maintain closer ties with Russia while remaining part of Ukraine. This, however, is a contentious proposal and would require careful negotiation and the consent of the Ukrainian people. Implementing a ceasefire and deploying a peacekeeping mission could also provide a temporary respite and create a space for negotiations. However, for any of these solutions to work, both parties must be willing to make concessions and commit to peace. International diplomacy also plays a crucial role. Global powers must work together to facilitate negotiations, provide humanitarian aid, and apply pressure where necessary to prevent further escalation. As history has shown, the path to peace is complex but not unattainable. With resolve and negotiation, a future of coexistence could yet be achieved. We've journeyed through centuries of shared history, conflict and hope between Russia and Ukraine. We've seen the dawn of their histories, the Soviet era, the pursuit of independence and the unfolding conflict. Understanding this historical context is vital when examining contemporary disputes. It's a complex, layered narrative where the past and present are deeply intertwined. Thank you for joining us on this historical journey. Please like, subscribe and hit the bell notification for more insightful videos. And don't forget to comment on what topic you'd like us to explore next.